I feel I should address the obvious, which is going to be those thinking, Spoon, the title, come on, this is all of the ingredients for a new tech exclusive. Perhaps, but I want people to see this, so instead of what I want to do, which is unleash a flurry of slurs, is to adopt a more conceited aristocratic kind of an approach, because I'm going for a deeper dive here. Oh, and speaking of seeing things, I want you all to look at this still pic and take notice of what you see. The resolution, it's on a phone. The graphic user interface, it's from social media. The background is not a classroom, it's a car, and it's a black woman. Just from that, most of you will suspect there's a pretty high chance she's going to say something stupid. Go Africa. Now, being born in South Africa and having spoken to many an African, I can tell you, Africans would never say, "Go Africa," because Africans don't identify by continent, they go by region or tribe. Much the same way Europeans go by nation. They aren't European, they're French or German or Dutch or English, and so on and so forth. The only ones who would say something as stupid as "Go Africa" are black Americans who know nothing about Africa. If I told you she's a black American woman coupled with everything else here, the chances of her saying something stupid is damn near guaranteed. Do tell, why do you think that is? But anyway, let's listen.
So Africa is really pushing them people out?
Not even a single sentence in, and she's confirmed every suspicion you have.
Y'all, I'm so happy and proud of Africa. Not only did they get them French up, at least in Niger, not only did they get them French up out of there, they told the Americans, y'all got to go too.
Yeah, potentially with the help of some Russians who are Europeans, as confirmed by Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, who happens to be black. But hey, let's not let facts get in the way of our racial narrative over here.
And guess what we doing? We finna leave.
Do you mean the American army or you blacks leaving America? Because I got news for you. The smarter blacks are not leaving the United States. And even if you all did leave America, do you honestly think there would be any complaints about that? Well, except for the Democrats who would lose their most subservient voting base.
I'm so proud of Africa. It's about time. Now we just need to work on South Africa.
Oh, this is not gonna end well for you.
Because apparently down in South Africa, they still think we in the Jim Crow era. They still think apartheid is there.
Apartheid ended in the early 90s with the democratic election of Nelson Mandela. It's been effectively a one-party state for 3 decades, having seen 4 ANC presidents. I would suggest you maybe look up some facts about South Africa, pre- and post-apartheid, if you can pry your face away from the camera long enough to attain the capacity to read.
But I do know...
You don't know jack shit.
...that in South Africa for many years, the Africans have been murking them European farmers, which is not good. You know, they shouldn't do that. But they've been telling them to leave, and then they won't leave. They're like, no, this is my father's land. Like, that was stolen.
Biarkan dia berteriak.
Like, this is your father's land that they stole. And that's why the local Africans keep making their rounds and murking y'all. Leave. I mean, it's just clear and obvious that they don't want you. And they're like, well, if we leave, where do we go? Back to Europe. That's where you... Back to Europe. You might not have nothing, but you're going to go back to Europe, baby. That's how that works.
All right, now that I'm enraged and half-cocked on the whiskey here, let me just get the obvious out of the way. This one is a colossal moron. The only thing she got right was the farm murders and nothing else. Everything else she said there is factually wrong. Let me give you all a brief history of South Africa, right? It was first discovered by Portuguese explorer Bartholomew Diaz in the early 1480s, naming it the Cape of Storms for obvious reasons, and then later the Cape of Good Hope due to either tourism or because of its trading potential for Europe by Portugal's monarch, King John II. Old information, you can never be quite sure. Then, of course, we had fellow explorer Vasco da Gama using the trade route later to make his way to the Indies. So the first fort was built there by Dutch Calvinists in the early 1650s, and then later added some Huguenots, French Protestants, who were escaping persecution in Catholic France. A few years after that would see the arrival of German Lutheran soldiers, and this basically makes up the core Afrikaner group for several generations. Now, given that South Africa is a very isolated location, naturally, it is not exactly a place sprawling with civilization, so contact with the locals is limited to the Khoi and the Sand people. Bushmen, basically. Smaller frame folks, so they weren't enslaved. Slaves would be brought in after a 2-year expedition set out by the commander of the fort further up, I believe on the east coast, to find the Muslim slave trade. So almost half of South Africa at this point is unoccupied by black Africans at the time. The black population is about 2.5 to 3 million at the turn of the 1800s. Now, Shaka Zulu, the famous Zulu warrior, would lead several wars in from the east of South Africa, either incorporating bested tribes or violently massacring them in a way that would make Kaiser in New Vegas blush. By about the early 1820s, they would leave 2 million dead in their wake. At the time, the Boer would flee British dominion in the Cape and proceed into the hinterlands and form several republics in what is essentially, once again, unoccupied land. So you have pretty much uncontested Boer expansion for slightly less than 200 years. However, around this time is the first Zulu contact with the Boer. After they traded some land from the Zulus betrayed the delegation, killed them, as well as the nearby camp in the typical brutal fashion, called the Weenan Massacre, by the way. Now, after news of this, the remaining group of Boere, known as the Voortrekkers, led by a man named Andries Pretorius, would side with a rogue group of Zulus. Now, this group of rogue Zulus was led by a prince, a brother of Shaka, who was killed by his own kin after he went insane following the death of his mother. Naturally, this prince might have a bit of a bone to pick with his own kin for killing his own brother, so they team up to take out the Zulus, who killed the other Voortrekkers, an event now known as the Battle of Blood River. So the Voortrekkers would help the prince and his tribe depose the current leader of the Zulus in order to crown the prince as the king as a peace agreement between the groups. Now, the Zulu kingdom, however, would be defeated by the British about 50 years later. Then, of course, the discovery of gold would eventually kick off the Boer Wars, because the English are a royal bunch of bastards. Here's a fun fact for you. I think the first modern inception of what we would call concentration camps today were actually done by the British to the Afrikaners, starving their women and children. And that is the reason why the Afrikaners hate the English. So you can imagine by the time World War I comes around, they're not exactly too keen on joining the forces with the British against the Kaiser after what the British did to them, and for the same reason during the Second World War against Hitler. So the very least we can do to avenge our kin is to keep kicking the shit out of England in World Cups as we chase the William Webb Ellis successfully 3 times since 2007, twice against England actually. Now in 1948, the Boer would wrestle control away from the English dominant parliament and do a census of their own in 1950. The Euro population about 2 million and the blacks about 5 million. Now seeing as I don't give a right bollock about political discourse, I will say this. Considering these people were about 2 generations past being intimately familiar with the brutal massacre of their own kin, I imagine using the power of the state to institute some form of self-preservation would seem kind of, sane. And given that in the present day we're pushing for resegregation in the form of safe spaces because some people say mean words, I feel like the actions of my kin were pretty freaking justified. The black population would boom from 5 million to 40 million by the end of the century. That's a hell of an oppression you're suffering under, where you can octuple your population within half a damn century. I wonder if abundance of food at the hands of superior Afrikaner farming techniques and the largest hospital in the world being in South Africa might have something to do with those numbers. Oh, but those horrible colonials, right? 30 years of democratic rule flirting with a borderline communist state has decimated the RAN, made it the most AIDS-ridden country on earth, one of the most dangerous with a failing power grid, as almost half the population in a country of about 60 million are 100% dependent on the state. And what's their biggest concern? Oh yeah, getting rid of the farmers who grow your food. Newsflash, a country further to the north tried this, called Zimbabwe, under Mugabe. It turns out when your country is called the breadbasket of Africa and about 78% of your country's economy is agricultural exports, and you remove the people who grow that export, yet your country tanks. And now South Africa wants to do the same damn thing. My God, I wonder why the state is failing. You're either so corrupt to the point of absurd, or you're genuinely stupid people.
Both. Both is good.
Or that, probably that. Let me give all of you a suggestion. Go to a search engine and type in 10 quotes architect of apartheid and just read them. I'm not saying any more. Because in my opinion, modern Western society is so soft and coddled, living in this bubble of disconnection and delusion, yet so weak and frail, that when confronted with the harsh realities of a different time, of hard men in a hardened time that had to make real hard decisions, people can't even hear about it without having a mental breakdown, which is pathetic. Hell, I would go so far as to say, if you are unable to step outside the cult of Overton and analyze the events of the past by leaving your morality of the present day in the present, you don't have the capacity to understand politics and history. Simple as that. Because you might notice the regime is not exactly a fan of coupling all of that with critical thinking or peering into the past trying to understand it. Because if you do, oh boy, you might come to the realization of, hey, maybe these people weren't just horrible instant political slogan of the day. Maybe, considering what they witnessed and experienced firsthand, that might have an influence on their worldview and therefore their actions. And once you read what these old-timers thought, their reasons, their justifications, their predictions, and then you look at the present day, and another realization might hit you. These are disturbingly accurate predictions of the modern world. How far back do you think the practice of ignoring reality really goes? Or worse, they weren't ignored, they were used. I'll let you all ponder that for yourselves. What else did this one say? Oh yes, of course, the land was stolen! From who? There was no one there. There's no civilization, no rule of law, no private property, no contracts. You had virtually uninterrupted, civilized Buddha expansion from the West for almost 2 centuries. Meanwhile, the Zulus were massacring their way from the East, leaving 2 million dead in their wake. When they finally met, land was negotiated for via task and livestock, at which point the Voortrekkers were killed for that. There's an objectively better group of humans here, and it is, of course, the Christian Afrikaners. But what right is it their land exactly? Blood and soil, is it? Oh yeah, that's funny. By the way, you might have noticed this. Blood and soil is totally fine, as long as you're against colonialism. Blood and soil for Europeans, though? Oh, no, that's very, very bad. Funny that one, isn't it? African tribe A wipes out African tribe B. Totally fine. Reminds me of that joke by Eddie Izzard. And the reason we let them get away with it is because they killed their own people. We're sort of fine with that. It's like black on black crime, totally ignored for some reason.
You want to make the media go away? Just mention black on black crime.
Yeah, pretty much that. However, when European civilization A does the exact same thing and wipes out African tribe A, conquest and conquer goes from totally fine to now mysteriously theft. It's amazing how that works, isn't it? Why, you would almost think it's a coping mechanism to deal with the fact they lost. Oh yeah, just send the Afrikaners back to Europe, despite the fact they've built another nation and culture for themselves for over 300 years. I'm sure by virtue of skin color they would fit in just fine. It's not like they were fleeing persecution from people who look like them in the friggin' first place or anything. They've been there for longer than the existence of the American state. It is amazing how black Americans hold this weird concept of racial harmony of a continent, of its people, they know nothing about. Yet in America, statistically speaking, the biggest threat to black people is other black people. But you will notice black Americans who earn money know this, and so the first thing they do once they've earned money is get the hell away from other black people. If you're European and you point that out, you're problematic. If you're black and you point that out, you're a comedian. Only in America do blacks complain about gentrification when demographics change, yet also moan about white flight. Only in America will blacks claim that showing up on time and speaking English properly is talking white, even though literally every other demographic that comes to the United States does the same thing. And should black Americans do that, they're viewed favorably by everyone else, except their own kin, who will label them as sellouts. Only in America can a man who under any other circumstances would be called an Uncle Tom, a sellout for acting white. Once he gets elected, however, goes from the whitest black dude to ever live in America to America's first black president. Only in America can that dude inflame racial relations for 8 freaking years and then buy a house in Martha's Vineyard, the whitest neighborhood in all of the United States. But anyway, I do want to go a bit deeper with regards to interactions and information exchange on this medium, because I was looking at the entire experience overall. Take a look at the video, for example. Now, the person who uploaded it to Twitter is not the author of the video, but as is the case, they will add a heading or description to the video signaling to the followers they either agree or disagree with the content of the video. So anyone who interacts with it has information and a slanted perspective before they've even hit the play button. Now, take the information from the video, whether this be factual data or ideological signaling from the individual itself. The people engaging with it are simply going to post an agreement with the information or chastise it. Now, whether the information in the clip is true or not, it still has the capacity to reinforce what the viewer already believes, in which case all this does is basically act as a hardening feedback loop. Now, what's really interesting to me, though, is how those who disagree with the factually incorrect data act, because they will correct the information as if the individual in the video is simply a piece of code that's missing information. The individual in the video may as well be an AI, because the interaction from the audience who aimed to correct it would be no different at all. My friend Lamented said, "It's the modern equivalent of the boomer yelling at the TV," which is a freaking accurate description, by the way. And much like that, it doesn't actually reach the person in the video that's incorrect. So again, all you're left doing is hardening those who already agree, though you are perhaps informing the factually correct crowd a bit more. But hell, you can even have this learning mechanism in reverse, a la seeing several ignorant people saying or doing objectively stupid things repeatedly in itself is information and can reinforce or even change a certain worldview, the repetition instilling pattern recognition, for example. So the people who are concerned with the facts focus on the consequences of the actions espoused by the rhetoric, which would be utterly disastrous. We have historical evidence for this, because as it turns out, the people who've never made advanced infrastructure don't know how to manage advanced infrastructure. Shocking. But again, we act like they're just machines who need correcting, even though we would all admit humans are not moved by logical rationality. Which brings us to the other side of how to look at this, the social signaling. Instead of looking at the facts presented in the video, look rather at what the overall reason for making the video in the first place would be. It's not meant to be factual. It's not even meant to make any sense. It's merely meant to say, I am down for the cause, I support power. And once that hits, then you can start asking some tougher questions, such as, if you know where this rhetoric will lead, if you know the consequences of following this rhetoric, if you wish history not to repeat itself once again, how justified are you in employing more heavy-handed interventionist tactics? Cheers for watching, and once again, I apologize for nothing.